There is a town in Colombia where more than 40 feet of rain falls in a single year. Enough water to bury a 4-story building. It holds the world record. 600 miles away, in the same country, families dig ponds by hand and store rainwater in them because months go by without a single drop. Colombia is the top corner of South America. The Caribbean on one side, the Pacific on the other, and the equator running through the bottom of it. Between those two extremes, it keeps almost every climate the continent has. Desert, rainforest, grass plain, snow. Colombia covers less than 1% of the land on Earth. About 1 in every 10 known species on the planet lives on it. There are more kinds of birds in this one country than in Europe and North America put together. Over the next hour, we travel the length of it, from the desert at the top of the continent to the last town on the Amazon. Somewhere in that jungle stands a cliff covered in paintings 12,000 years old that no outsider could reach until 2016. We start where the rain stops. The peninsula is called La Guajira. It is the northern end of South America, the last ground on the continent before the sea. Follow it north, and the road gives out well before the land does. At the very tip, Punta Galinas, the dunes drop straight into the Caribbean. Every other place on this continent lies south of that spot. Since 1989, a 60-foot lighthouse has stood on it, the northernmost lighthouse in South America, guiding ships around a coast with almost nothing behind it. Almost nothing is the right description. La Guajira has one river worth the name, the Rancheria, and after that, very little. Cactus and dry scrub cover most of it. The rain arrives in short seasons, then stops for months at a time. So the Wayuu catch the rain instead. They dig shallow ponds into the ground by hand and call them jagüeyes. Those ponds have kept people alive out here far longer than Colombia has existed. Whatever one is holding when the wet weeks end has to last until the next ones arrive. The rest of the year, the desert is very quiet. In the heat of an afternoon, the only sound for miles can be children driving goats between the cactus. Without those voices, you would think nobody lived out here at all. Following that coast back south, we come to a headland the Spanish named Cabo de la Vela. The Cape of the Sail. That is not what the people who live here call it. In Wayuu, it is Japira, the gate to the afterlife. Every soul, the Wayuu say, passes through this cape on its way to rest with the ancestors. That belief shapes what happens here on the ground. When a Wayuu person dies, the burial is not the end of it. 5 years later, the family comes back, lifts the bones, wraps them in a woven hammock, and buries them a second time, for good, in the clan's own cemetery. Only then is the journey finished. The cape itself is bare. Wind comes off the water at 30 to 40 miles an hour, almost every day of the year. Below it, the sea is flat, warm, and shallow. In most parts of the world, that combination would have lined the shore with resorts. Here there is not one. Kite surfers come for a few days and go again, and the cape empties behind them. A little inland, shallow salt lagoons turn pink, where flamingos crowd in to feed. In a landscape bleached the colour of bone, they are the only colour for miles. La Guajira shows how little water this coast can hold. The mountain just southwest of it shows the opposite. The Sierra Nevada de Santa Marta is not part of the Andes. It stands alone. A rough triangle of rock rising straight off the Caribbean plain, with no other mountain in Colombia touching it. It is the highest coastal mountain range in the world. The summit reaches nearly 19,000 feet. The beach is 25 miles away. 25 miles is nothing. On a flat road, it is half an hour of driving. Here it is the distance between people swimming in warm water and ice that never melts. No mountain on Earth puts snow that close to the sea. Because it climbs so fast, the mountain stacks almost every climate Colombia has onto one slope. Caribbean wetland at the bottom, then dry forest. Then forest so high it sits inside the clouds, then bare rock, then snow. More than 600 kinds of birds live across those bands, each one keeping to the height that suits it. Walk up from the beaches into the foothills and the air changes inside a single day. Salt and heat at the start, cool and green by the end. Elsewhere, you would need a plane ticket to feel that much change in one day. In 1972, a family out hunting turkeys in those foothills came across a set of stone steps climbing into the trees. They followed them. The steps kept going up. At the top was a city. The Tayrona built it around the year 800, on terraces cut into the mountainside. At its height it held as many as 8,000 people, and it was the political centre of this whole region. It is older than Machu Picchu, and almost nobody goes there. The people who found it called it Green Hell. The name Colombians use is Ciudad Perdida, the lost city. There is still no road to it. Getting there means several days on foot, through jungle and across rivers. That is more or less how anyone would have arrived 1,200 years ago. But the people who built it never disappeared. 4 peoples still live across the Sierra Nevada: the Kogi, the Wayuu, the Ahuaco, and the Cancuamo. They are direct descendants of the Tayrona, somewhere between 35 and 51,000 of them today. They call themselves the Elder Brothers, and they call this mountain the heart of the world. Among them are trained priests called mamas. A code known as the Law of Origin tells them how a person should treat a river, a storm, or anything else alive on the mountain. Back at sea level, the last slopes of that mountain run straight into the water. This stretch of coast is Tayrona National Park. There is almost no gap here between the jungle and the beach. Rainforest, dry forest, and coral reef All sit within a short walk of one another, inside a single park. At Cabo San Juan, the sand splits around a rocky point with a palm-roofed hut on top of it. Hammocks hang between the boulders below. Walkers who come in from the trailhead sleep in them and wake to the sound of the water a few steps away. Not all of the park is open ground. Communities descended from the Tayrona still treat parts of it as sacred, and certain trails close to outsiders during the ceremonial periods each year. In the fishing villages along this coast, the day runs on the tide rather than the clock. Wooden boats go out before first light. By the middle of the day, when the Caribbean sun turns hard, the nets get mended in whatever shade there is. There is a great deal of country still ahead of us. Before we leave this coast, one question. Colombia is one of the world's biggest producers of which drink? Put your answer in the comments. Look at Colombia's Caribbean coast on a map, and one city sits behind a wall. Cartagena has been inside that wall for more than 400 years. The stone has stood in salt air and hard sun the whole time, and it shows. Inside, the streets are narrow and the balconies hang heavy with bougainvillea. Seen from the water, the line of the rooftops has barely changed in 4 centuries. There was only ever one way in. Torre del Reloj, the clock tower, a single arched gate in the wall. Spanish traders came through it, so does every visitor today. And the city never stopped using it. It is still where people arrange to meet. A short walk in from that gate is the main square. Cartagena's cathedral has stood on it since colonial times, and its bell still marks the hours the way it always has. The wall was built to keep people out. Today, anyone can walk along the top of it, and it costs nothing. Just inland, on a hill above those rooftops, stands the fortress of San Felipe de Barajas. It is the reason the city held in 1741. That year a British invasion fleet arrived off Cartagena. It was nearly 3 times the size of the force that would attack Washington in 1814. The man defending the place was a Spanish admiral named Blas de Lezo. By then he had already lost an eye, an arm and a leg in earlier fighting. He held. The British sailed away without the city. The fortress is still up there, a slab of stone stepped into the hillside, looking down on the harbour it was built to watch. If San Felipe was built to stop outsiders getting in, the village an hour south of the city was built by people getting out. In 1599, around 30 enslaved people escaped into the forest south of Cartagena. The man who led them was called Bencos Biojo. Within a year they had built a settlement of their own, with a wooden palisade around it for defense. The Spanish word for that palisade is Palenque. It became the name of the place. San Basilio de Palenque, the first free African town in the Americas. 400 years later, about 3,500 people still live there. They kept their own language too. It is called Palenquero, a mix of Kikongo, Portuguese and Spanish, and it is the only Spanish-based Creole in all of South America. Their ancestors used it so slaveholders could not follow what was being said. Today, only about half the village still speaks it well, and it is losing ground one generation at a time. Palenque still comes to Cartagena every morning. The women are called palenqueras. They walk the old streets in bright dresses, with bowls of tropical fruit balanced on their heads, selling produce the way their families have for generations. Colombia's Caribbean does not end at the coast. Out in the open sea, Colombia owns a group of islands. From San Andres, the closest mainland is not Colombia. The coast of Nicaragua is about 140 miles away. Bogota, the capital that governs the island, is 750 miles off, more than 5 times farther. You can see how far out you are before you even land. From a plane window, the sea around San Andres shows 7 separate shades of blue and green. Each shade is a coral reef, sitting at a different depth, under the same sunlight. You can hear it too. Islanders speak San Andres Providencia Creole, an English-based language that exists nowhere on the Colombian mainland. In everyday conversation, people here call themselves Rizal first and Colombian second. The Rizal once made up 57% of the people on these islands. Migration has since pushed that share below 40%. On Providencia, the quieter of the 2 main islands, everything runs slower than on San Andres. By afternoon, the whole town seems to have gathered into the shade of the same few trees. Back on the mainland, the country's biggest river finally reaches the sea. A few miles from that mouth sits Barranquilla. The city grew up among the ravines the river cut into the land. Barranca means ravine. The name never changed. In 1921, the President of Colombia gave the city a title that stuck, Puerta de Oro de la República, the Golden Gate of the Republic. He meant it literally. Almost everything new arrived in Colombia through this port first. South America's first airport opened here in 1919, and the small airline that started with it grew into Avianca, the national carrier Colombians still fly today. Colombia's first commercial radio broadcast went out from a Barranquilla station on the 8th of December 1929. The heat never really moves. The average temperature sits close to 80 degrees all year, and the day is built around it. People rest through the worst of the afternoon and come back out when the sun drops. Vendors sell juices made from fruit most of the world has never seen. Corozo, tamarindo, zapote, nispero. Ask people here what daily life is like, and the answer is that it is lived like a carnival. Nobody waits for the festival calendar. The river that made that port runs almost the whole length of the country. The Magdalena is about 950 miles long. For centuries, it was the closest thing Colombia had to a road. It starts far to the south, in the highland streams of the Andes. Every drop of water that reaches Barranquilla began up there. Partway down, it collects the Cauca, the other great river of the Western Mountains. The peoples who lived along the Cauca held it sacred long before it became the route that carried coffee and sugarcane out of the valley. Coffee came down this water, so did coal. So did most of the country's history, moving at the speed of a boat. None of that has entirely stopped. River communities along the Magdalena still fish from it and still travel on it. The barges going downstream today carry the same cargo their grandparents once moved by canoe. What changed is the speed. The 600 miles between Bogota and this coast are now a single overnight bus ride. Passengers board in Andean cold and get down in sea level heat by morning. Follow that river upstream and east, and the land begins to stand up. The Magdalena measures this country by its length. Santander measures it by its height. The road from the rim of the Chicamocha Canyon down to the canyon floor takes about 2 hours. In those 2 hours, you cross more vertical distance than most countries have between their highest and lowest points. People here use that drop rather than avoid it. Around San Gil, paragliders launch straight off the rim of the canyon. A short drive away, rafters run the whitewater of the Fonts River. The climate changes with the height, and it changes fast. An old stone path called the Camino Real, the Royal Road, runs between the towns of Barichara and Guane. Walk it, and you go from cool stone streets to humid tropical forest in the same 2 hours, this time on foot. Barichara itself is built from a soft yellow sandstone that families here still cut and shape by hand, the way their ancestors did. Nobody teaches it in a school. It passes from one pair of hands to the next. Long before the town existed, this land belonged to the Guane people. Their descendants still hold territory nearby, one of the few protected indigenous zones in Colombia. South of Santander, the ranges soften into high farm country. This is Boyaca. It looks like nothing in particular. Potato fields, cattle, stone walls, cold green valleys with snow dusting a few peaks above them. Villagers here still work terraces their Muisca ancestors cut into these same slopes centuries before any Spaniard arrived. Much of what they grow still goes down to feed the markets of the capital. On the 7th of August 1819, a battle was fought in this countryside. It lasted a little over 2 hours. The rebel army was led by Simon Bolivar, the general fighting to push Spain out of South America. He had 2,850 men. In one afternoon, they broke the Spanish force in front of them. That single afternoon decided which way the whole continent would go. The fields went back to being fields. What has not changed is the cold. Evenings up here drop to around 65 degrees, even after a warm day. Nobody in Boyaca goes far without a ruana, the thick wool poncho of these mountains, folded somewhere within reach. A few hours further south, the road climbs onto a wide, cold plateau and does not come back down. Bogota sits on it at 8,600 feet. It is the third highest capital city on Earth. That height decides the weather. An afternoon here can go from full sun to hail inside an hour. Locals call it having 4 seasons in one day, and nobody leaves the house without a jacket, whatever the forecast says. The name came from the people who were here first. The Muisca called this place Bacara. It meant something like the enclosure outside the farm fields, a description of the savanna long before there was a city on it. Plaza de Bolivar has been the middle of that city since 1539. 4 buildings frame it: a cathedral, a capitol, a palace of justice, and the mayor's palace. Each was raised in a different century, and none of them match. Then there are the Sundays. Every Sunday and public holiday since 1974, Bogotá closes about 80 miles of its own streets to cars, from 7 in the morning until 2 in the afternoon. It is called Ciclovia. It began with 6,000 riders. Today, more than 1 million people fill those streets on foot, on bicycles, on skates, while the traffic waits. It is considered the largest regularly scheduled recreation event on the planet. One wall of that plateau rises straight out of the city. The peak on it is Monserrate, 10,300 feet up, with a church on the summit. The church is the newest thing on this mountain. The Muisca called the peak Quijichacaca, grandmother's foot, and held it sacred for centuries before it had a Spanish name. They also watched it closely. Stand in the main square down in the city on the June solstice, and the sun comes up directly behind the summit. The Muisca were tracking that alignment with their own astronomy long before anyone built a shrine up there. The peak beside it they called Grandfather's Foot. It carries a 50-foot statue of the Virgin now, put up after earthquakes brought down the chapels that stood there before. There are 3 ways up Monserrate today, and all 3 are still in use. Pilgrims climb the old trail on foot, 1.5 miles of it, straight up 2,000 feet. The walk takes anywhere from 50 minutes to 3 hours, depending on the walker. Since 1929, there has also been a funicular, a railway hauled up the slope on a cable, tunneling 800 feet through the rock. And there is a cable car for everyone else. If Monserrate is the mountain people climb, then the mountain an hour north is the one they cut into. The Muisca were mining salt out of it as far back as the 5th century BC. When the explorer Alexander von Humboldt came through in 1801, he judged the deposit bigger than any salt mine he had seen in Europe. Colombians later carved an entire cathedral out of the rock salt at Zipaquira, 650 feet underground, inside a mine that is still working. All of this sits in Cundinamarca, the province that wraps around Bogotá on every side. Salt still comes out of that mountain, but what the high savanna sells today is flowers. The reason is the cold. Down in the warm lowlands, Colombia grows tropical fruit. Up here, the air stays cool all year, even this close to the equator, and cool air is what roses want. Workers spend 9-hour shifts, clipping thorns and measuring stems by hand. The greenhouse air is so thick and sweet that they describe it as almost too much. The cut stems are chilled to 34 degrees, just above freezing, and within days they are 2,500 miles away, on a doorstep in New York. West of the capital, we cross the Magdalena Valley, and the land folds up again into a second range of mountains. The province on the far side is Antioquia. The people here will tell you, it is a country inside a country. They half mean it. Antioquians call themselves Paisas, and they have their own accent, their own slang, and a pride that goes with both. Most of Colombia says, tú, for you. A Paisa says, vos. Words like parcero, a friend, and baraco, somebody tough, started here and spread to the rest of the country. The province's capital is Medellin. In Comuna 13, a neighborhood once known for some of the worst violence in the country, young people painted the bullet-scarred walls with murals about what they had lived through. The same separateness shows up on a plate. Bandeja paisa is rice, beans, ground beef, chicharrón, chorizo, a fried egg, plantain, avocado, and an arepa, stacked so high it was never meant for one person. This is a farming province, and the plate says so. Sunday lunch runs to 3 generations at the same table, every week. Black coffee, which Paisas call tinto, is drunk all day here. Cup after small cup, from early morning until dark. We leave Medellin and head east into green hills. Out of them stands a single block of grey rock, straight up. Nothing else around it comes close to its size. It is called El Penon de Guatape. The first people known to have reached the top got there in 1954. There were 3 of them, all local. They hammered wooden sticks into a crack that runs up one face of the rock. One stick at a time, they wedged them in and stood on them, turning the crack into a ladder as they climbed. It took the 3 of them 5 days to reach the summit. Today there are stairs in that crack and a lookout tower at the top. From up there, the hills below are cut apart by water. It reaches in from every direction in more than a dozen long blue fingers. The rock never moved, the water around it arrived. Those blue fingers are a reservoir. The valley beneath them was flooded on purpose. The hills that once stood above the farmland are islands now. Guatape Reservoir has more than 300 miles of shoreline, threading between the flooded hills. That is more coastline than some entire Caribbean countries have, and all of it sits inland, in the Andes. The families who farmed the valley floor did not leave. They run boat tours and lakeside restaurants now, on the water covering their old fields. In a single generation, the same families went from working the soil to working the shoreline. At sunset, the water turns gold, then pink, then almost black, inside an hour. Everything we have crossed so far was shaped by the same thing. The mountains themselves, the Andes run the length of South America. They come up into Colombia from the south and here the range does not stay one range. At a knot of high ground called the Colombian Massif, it splits into three. All three run north across the country, side by side. That is why Colombia is laid out the way it is. Two long valleys lie between the ranges. The Magdalena and the Cauca, the rivers we have already followed, run down them. The third range, the western one, faces the Pacific. Most of the big inland cities sit high on one range or another. The knot in the south does one more thing. It supplies 70% of all the fresh water Colombians drink and put on their fields. One tangle of mountains and the water for everyone in the country. On the slopes, the farming is done the way the ground allows. Rows of coffee, corn, and potatoes climb hillsides too steep to walk without leaning into them. What gets the crop back down is a person and a mule. On the middle range, the growing season never really closes. These mountains sit where two rainfall systems meet. That gives Caldas 2 wet periods a year instead of one. Coffee here ripens almost year-round. Most coffee countries get one short harvest, and then they wait. That changes the shape of a life. Families live on the farms they work, and the calendar never clears. Planting, weeding, picking, drying, and then planting again. Pickers walk the same rows every few days. They take only the cherries that have reached exactly the right shade of red and leave the rest for the next pass. No machine has ever replaced them. In the mornings, the mist sits so low in the valleys that the farmhouses seem to float above it, and the smell of roasting beans reaches the road before the fog has lifted. The provincial capital, Manizales, is built along a ridge so steep that its streets climb and drop like a switchback trail. On a clear day, from the cathedral steps, you can see the snow on the volcano. That volcano is Nevado del Ruiz. It stands 17,400 feet high, with a glacier on top of it. It had been quiet for 69 years when it erupted on the 13th of November, 1985. Meltwater from the ice cap came down the mountain as mud, and it buried the town of Armero below, where more than 20,000 people died in a single night. The mountain has been on constant volcanic alert since 2010. The glacier on its summit is shrinking. Underneath it, the volcano is still active. Around it lies Los Nevados National Park, 4 provinces wide and nearly 600 square miles in all. It drops from glacial peaks above 16,000 feet to forest at 8,000. The high open ground between them is covered in frailejones, thick fuzzy plants that look like something built rather than grown. They take water out of the clouds and let it go slowly downhill. That is what keeps the rivers running for millions of people below. One bird lives up there and nowhere else. It is a hummingbird, the buffy helmet crest, and it feeds among those plants at an altitude most birds never reach. The mountain we just left took a valley away in a matter of hours. A few hours south, in the province of Quindio, the same range keeps one alive for centuries. It is a valley where the trees are in the wrong place. Normally a forest is tallest on the slopes and thins out in the open ground. In the Cocora Valley, the tallest trees stand out in the middle of the pasture, and they are wax palms. A wax palm grows to about 200 feet. That is the height of a 20-story building. They rise so far above the cloud forest around them that the tree line looks as if it has been drawn upside down. And they only grow here. The wax palm survives in one narrow band of cool cloud forest, between 6,500 and 10,000 feet. A few hundred feet lower or higher, and it simply will not grow. A single palm can live 200 years. Trees measured in the field have been dated at 140 to 170 years old. They were standing long before anyone alive today was born. And underneath them, in their shade, cattle graze. To the farmers of Cocora, this is not a wonder of the world. It is pasture. We cross the western range of the Andes and drop down the far side. On this side, the ground never dries out. This is Choco, on the Pacific coast, and it is one of the wettest places on Earth. The town with the world record is here. It is called Yoro. In a single year, it gets more than 30 times the rain that falls on most temperate cities. So people here do not wait for the rain to pass. They plan the day around it arriving, and the air almost never drops below 80 degrees. Rain like that also decides how you move. Between Quibdó, the provincial capital, and the villages scattered through the rainforest, there is often no road at all. Instead, there is the Atrato River and small wooden boats going up and down it. The river is the road. More than 8 in 10 people in Choco are Afro-Colombian, descendants of Africans brought here in chains to mine this coast's gold. The gold is still being pulled out of the same rivers. In 2011 alone, it came to more than 20 tons. Melted into one block, that is a cube of gold about 3 feet on a side. More than half of Colombia's Embera people live here too, more than 35,000 of them. In the evenings on Quibdó's riverside boardwalk, families come out to watch the sun go down over the Atrato while music drifts from the bars along the water. The rain eases as we go south, down the same coast. Choco is a province of river villages. Valle del Cauca, the next one down, has Colombia's third largest city, more than 2 million people in it. The province itself is split between two worlds, the coast and the mountains. On the coast there are Pacific mangroves and black volcanic sand. Most visitors picture the white Caribbean beaches on the other side of the country. This sand is black. Climb east and you are in cool Andean coffee country. Between the two, the whole valley floor is sugarcane, which has fed the sugar and ethanol industries here for generations. In the middle of that valley is Cali, at about 3,000 feet. It stays warm all year, between 66 and 86 degrees. Cali calls itself the salsa capital of the world. The title goes back to a boom in the 1970s and 80s that filled the city with dance clubs and dance schools, and they never really closed. What surprises visitors is how ordinary it is. In neighborhoods like Granada, it comes out of open doorways and passing cars in the middle of the afternoon, while everyone is running errands. Off this coast, out in the Pacific, sits a small green island. In 1527, the Spanish conquistador Francisco Pizarro landed on it. Several of his men were bitten by snakes and died. He named the place Gorgona after the snake-haired monster of Greek myth. The name stuck, and so did the reputation. From 1959 to 1984, Gorgona held Colombia's most dangerous prisoners in a maximum security penal colony. It was so far out and so feared that people called it Colombia's Alcatraz. The island is a national park now. It belongs to Cauca, a province that runs from these Pacific mangroves all the way up to Andean peaks, over 13,000 feet. Half a day east, back over the mountains, is Huila. This is where the Magdalena River is born. A few hours north of those highland streams, the ground turns to desert. The Tatacoa is Colombia's second largest arid zone, a maze of eroded clay hills that change color through the day. Ochre in the morning, grey at noon, red at dusk. It can look like three different places between sunrise and sunset. What it is best known for, though, comes after dark. Hardly any town light reaches out here. That gives Tatacoa one of the few genuinely black night skies in Colombia. A small observatory in the desert shows visitors the Milky Way and distant nebulae at a level of detail most people living near a city will never see. The ground helps too. All day the clay soaks up heat. After the sun goes down, it gives that heat back, and campers lie on ground that stays warm for hours while the sky above them fills with stars. People do live out here. Families raise goats and farm small irrigated patches between the clay hills in a landscape that gets almost no rain at all. East of the Andes, the country flattens out into open plain. Somewhere out in that plain, in the province of Meta, is a river people cross a country to see. For most of the year, Cano Cristales looks like any clear river running over rock. Then, from the end of July into November, the riverbed turns red. Not the water, the bed. The color is a plant. It grows underwater, holding on to the stones, and for those 4 months it blooms. Red, yellow, blue, green and black at once. The water above it stays glass clear. From the bank you are looking straight down onto a riverbed that has turned red. Walking on the plants is not allowed. The color is there to be looked at, not stood on. The people who live along the river work the bloom as guides. Their season is the plant season, 4 months, and then the river goes clear again. Getting there means a flight and then days on foot. By 2016, more than 16,000 people a year were making that trip anyway. Further into the same lowlands, in Guaviare, sandstone hills rise out of the forest. They are called La Lindosa. The one people climb is Cerro Azul, and its walls are covered in paintings. There are so many of them that people here call the place the Sistine Chapel of the Amazon. The paintings are 12,000 years old. The people who made them were living here at the end of the last ice age. For most of living memory, nobody outside could get anywhere near them. For decades, this was a war zone in Colombia's long internal conflict, fought over by the government and guerrilla forces and closed to everyone else. It opened only after the peace agreement of 2016. Even now, reaching the cliffs means a 5-hour walk through the forest. Archaeologists worked the site in 2017 and 2018, then said nothing about it for 2 years. The world found out in November 2020 when a documentary showed the walls. Stand on top of Cerro Azul today, and the Amazon canopy runs unbroken to the horizon, green in every direction. It is the same view the painters had. Tatacoa is the place in this country where you can see the most sky. Where we go now is the place where you can see the least. South of Guaviare, Colombia, stops being mountains and rivers. It becomes forest, and the forest does not stop. This is Amazonas, the largest province in the country, bigger than Kentucky and almost entirely rainforest. Fewer than 80,000 people live in the whole of it. Under the canopy, even at noon, the light barely reaches the floor. It is filtered through so many layers of leaves that the air stays cool and dim all year. The sound is another matter. At dawn, the insects and birds come up together in a wall of noise that locals joke is louder than rush hour. One patch of this forest the size of 2 football fields can hold more than 500 species of tree and 1,500 species of plant. You could walk across that patch in a minute. More than 3,000 kinds of fruit grow wild out here. Western markets sell about 200 of them. The people were here long before any of the borders. The Ticuna, Bora, Uitoto, Yagua, and Cocama have lived in this forest for more than 5,000 years. At the far south is Leticia, the last Colombian town. No road connects it to the rest of the country. You arrive by boat down the Amazon, or you arrive by plane, and there is no third option. It sits so tight against Tabatinga on the Brazilian side that the 2 frontier towns have grown into one. A single strip of streets, more than 120,000 people, and a border running through the middle of it. Out here, the calendar belongs to the river. Houses stand on stilts. Canoes do the job of the school bus. Market day is not a date. It is whenever the boats come up from downriver. Planting and fishing follow the flood and the low water, not the months. And at its widest, near Leticia, the Amazon spreads so far that the far bank disappears. It stops looking like a river and starts looking like a sea with a current. We began where the rain stops, on a desert at the top of a continent. We are ending where it hardly ever stops at all, under a canopy at the bottom of a country. Colombia is where South America begins, and it begins by holding every kind of ground the continent will ever have. Desert and snow, reef and plain, cloud forest and jungle, all inside one border. And people live on all of it, on sand with no rivers. On a mountain high above the sea, on a river with no road to it. Every one of them has worked out how. There is more here than one journey can carry. 600 stone statues at San Agustin, carved by a people whose name nobody knows. 100 million year old sea reptile pulled out of a Boyaca desert. A people in the Amazon who met modern Colombia for the first time in 1988. Those are stories for another journey. If this land is your home, tell us in the comments what we missed. Thanks for traveling with us.